they actually see you. So as long as they're like,
I hit.
um,
Oh,
okay, as long as they're watching us on YouTube, and as long as they're, they can always comment, even though we haven't started yet.
got it. So,
Mm.
I mean, I'm pretty much. Are we on the YouTube?
Let's see. It says we're live, and the timer is going. So let's see.
So Instagram to let me censor it. So
No, not yet. I'm not seeing you. I'm not seeing this on the screen. There we go. There it is. We
we're on.
live now.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's
Mhm.
that
Yep.
one. That's pretty Liddy and Teach 'em Chuck. Thank you all for joining, whoever is watching and whoever is still coming in at the moment. Thank you for your time. And Chuck, thank you. Thank you.
All right,
I
no problem.
I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me on. I love to speak and I love to have these conversations. So, if somebody's willing to speak with me, they're friendly, they're respectful. Uh, I'm down for it. And I've known you over social media for some time. We started following each other a while ago, and pay attention to your content on Instagram and stuff. I didn't even know you had a YouTube channel until you asked me to come on your YouTube channel. So I just subscribed to you on YouTube. So I'm gonna start keeping up with that. But yeah, really appreciate what you're doing. So I wanted to come on and you know kick it with you. So let's get into some things.
For that. And this is as evident as day. Like this is my first YouTube live. So and
Yeah, yeah. Little Liddy, she a little nervous. She got to work out the kinks. We was doing a little troubleshooting before we got on. Uh, and I'm the wrong person you want in your corner if you having technical difficulties because I can't tell you how to fix it.
I guess I suck too. So I shall. So we are on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm looking right at us. There we go.
Okay, so we're gonna start with like our spiritual like religion growing up.
hmm
I guess I'll start with you. Like, what was your faith growing up?
So my faith growing up, I mean, I guess it's fair to say I guess it was fair to say I was a Christian. I mean, my dad was, he and my mother split up. I don't know what year it was and they officially divorced. You get to a certain age, your childhood from the time you're around 3, 4, 5 years old, you kind of have these vague, kind of foggy images and memories, but you can't really recall it that well. And so I just remember my dad kind of being in and out, in and out. I don't know what the heck they had going on. But I do remember like a lot of the fights and the arguments and the yelling. And sometimes I'll be in my room with the door closed, under the covers, you know, uh, crying or whatever, traumatized, listening to my parents fight. Even sometimes I would hear furniture moving and stuff like that. I don't know if they was fighting or whatever, but I don't know. I never really noticed my mom with any bruises or anything like that. But yeah, my parents didn't really get along too well. I don't really have good memories as a child of my mother and father being together. I do remember Christmas of '88. Christmas '88. That was a good Christmas. My dad came over Christmas morning. It was nice. But anyway, so my point in saying all that is that when I was a kid, I would go to my father's homes on weekends. I know at that point my mother and father had officially called it quits, and so I would go to his home. I would go visit my dad on weekends, and sometimes he would take us to church, or he and I would go to church. But it wasn't constant. It wasn't consistent. We would go from time to time. And same deal with my mom. My mom, she would go to church. There's a church. It was called those of folk, my Detroit people. They know what I'm talking about, especially if you live on the west side. If I say Unity Baptist Church, Unity Baptist Church, I think it was right there. It's right there on Livernois, right off Davison, and that was her church, or the church we would go to every now and again. I just remember as a kid, I hated going to church, hated it. hated it with a passion, because when I was young, who wants to get up on a Sunday, and then back then, back in the late 80s, early 90s, you were expected to, you know, put on your Sunday's best. You had to get dressed and put on some nice trousers, some slacks, put your uncomfortable hard bottom dress shoes on. And, there was a certain decorum. Nowadays, church is a little bit more relaxed. People come in sweatpants and flip flops. But back then it was different. And so as a kid, who likes that, right? You hate that kind of stuff. You want to sit around and whatever, watch Sunday morning cartoons. So I hated going to church. And not only that, but I hated it when I got there. Of course, because, you're talking about a lot of, Bible, you're going into scripture and stuff like that. And, for a young person, these are very complicated concepts for a person to grasp, even for a fully grown adult. And I just remember as a kid, I don't know, I think it is something innate within my personality where, I was very kind of questioning. I was curious. I wanted to know why things were the way they were. And if something didn't make sense, if it didn't resonate with me, then, I was just like, I don't know about that. And I would also look around and see the culture of so-called Black church. And, I went to, like I say, Unity Baptist Church. And so you get the typical Black Baptist experience. The the loud and the clapping and the singing and the people, going up and down the aisles, catching the Holy Ghost, screaming. And I just remember as a kid that being a very uncomfortable experience for me. I don't want to say it frightened me, but I can't describe the way it made me feel. It just made me feel like, okay, I'm surrounded by people who I don't know. It was just weird to me, and it made me uncomfortable, and I just wanted to leave because these people were acting strangely. I just didn't understand that. And as I got older, right, you get to your preteen years, and then that's when you really start, your imagination really starts to go into hyperdrive. And now I'm starting to question. Now I'm saying these people, this isn't real. This is all emotion. All these people are crazy. The people are, and mind you, you hear when I was younger, at least I would hear about these almost supernatural experiences people would have when it came to God, and people talked about speaking to God and having an experience where they saw God, almost like a road to Damascus moment. And I never had one of those moments. I never felt like that God ever spoke to me. I never felt like, I just never had something like a supernatural experience, right? It's the best way I could describe it. And so I thought it was all cap. I said, man, these people, they're this is all a joke, this is all a game. They want something to be real, and so they're kind of manifesting it. And so that sort of started my kind of critical anti-Christian phase that I went through for a great part of my life. And when I became late teen, around 17, 16, 17, that's when I started to get into I guess you can call it a the kind of Black intellectualism, right? And not understanding the secular underpinnings and the Marxist. I didn't understand any of that back then. But I started to pick up on these teachings, even even when it comes like with the Black Muslims. I had came across Elijah Muhammad's Message to the Black Man, and all these other works from these Black intellectuals. And you would hear about how much they would critique Christianity from this sort of economic or political point of view, and sort of point out how Blacks, we individual Black people, presumably being descendants of Africans, and about how Christianity symbolically marked this sort of clash of civilizations between Black and white. And so that really, really started me on this track where I was sort of like anti-religion, or anti-God almost. I wouldn't necessarily have considered myself to be an atheist, because I didn't necessarily want to accept that title or that label either. But I didn't quite know exactly what the term God even meant. Again, I kind of devolved into this nihilistic kind of a thing where I didn't necessarily believe in anything. I was just kind of going with the wind. It was sort of hard to define me. spiritually. But again, I kind of believed in a lot of these egocentric ideas that you hear a lot of the occultic, esoteric type spiritualists push these ideas about how knowledge can set you free, and black people need to get to know themselves and get to know their history, and through that, you will find that you are in fact the god you seek, right? Kind of like the whole Last Dragon, Bruce Leroy. I was the master the whole time, sort of a thing. I need to reach down inside myself to find that inner glow, whatever that kind of stuff is. And again, and so that was kind of like me in the beginning, and then I started to get off into a lot of conspiracy theory type stuff. We'll probably get into that later on in the conversation, but man, and like I said, it wasn't just like the black intellectuals, but even like whites who were warning, trying to warn society about this impending doom, this impending new world order, and just going into a lot of the secrets. Everybody goes to Bill Cooper, Behold a Pale Horse, and just that whole tradition. And so from there, I really started to rebuke religion then, because religion did not evade the criticism of your Bill Cooper, your Jordan Maxwell types. They believed that, Christianity, all the sort of major religions were all a part of this unilateral scheme to imprison mankind. And so I said, this is all garbage. Screw religion, screw this whole idea of God. What is God? Who is God? It was just dumb to me. But eventually that changed. But that was how I started out in the beginning. But I learned the error of my ways. I'll just put it that way. But I feel like I've been talking too much.
No, no, I'm here. I'm not.
So yeah, but eventually, I came to accept, and I went through a lot of hardship early on in my life, and I didn't really begin to start to turn a corner until my late 20s. I wasted a lot of time believing in stupid things and doing a lot of stupid things because I believed in those stupid things. And it wasn't until I realized that what was missing in my life the whole time was God. It reminds me of try to kind of dumb it down a bit. Like I don't know if you ever heard that song from DMX. It's my favorite DMX song. Say what you want to say about him and some of the other things that he spoke about in his raps and this and that. But one song that DMX had that I thought was especially powerful, and when I listen to it today, I try to find like something like yeah, you said some good things in the song, but that part and this from front to back, man. I mean, the whole song, I couldn't really find anything wrong with it, and that song really speaks to me. And that was DMX's song, "Ready to Meet Him." That song, even I'm full disclosure, Lydia, I tell you, I can't even listen to that song when I'm around other people because it really makes me emotional. I can only listen to that song when I'm by myself because I start to cry when I listen to it. It's a very powerful song. And what DMX is saying in that song really epitomizes my whole spiritual journey, my whole experience with God, and getting to know God. And like I think DMX said even in that song, I'm not gonna rap the lyrics, but he said that, pretty much like, you abandoned me when I needed you. And then God says, no, I'm here like I've always been. It was, well, I guess I'm about to wrap it. It was you who walked away and now are back again. So yeah, that's kind of like, so if you want to know kind of like my whole spiritual journey, just go and listen to DMX's song "Ready to Meet Him." And that was me. That was me. But DMX says they have us suspecting a war, but the real war is to follow the law of the Lord. It's not this whole black and white thing. But anyway, that's a very powerful song. But that's me in a nutshell.
And you're always that song when you heard it back then, when you were growing, going through changes, and now
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
spirit.
Like they say, like the cool kids say, it hit different now. It hit a little different. Back then, it was just like, oh, just this dope little song with a nice beat. But when you really understand the meaning of what DMX is saying in that song, yeah, it hit a little different now.
No, I love DMX. Yeah,
Hmm.
DMX. Now basically you grew up Baptist for the most part, right? If that's
Mhm.
far.
Yeah, I grew up Baptist. Like I said, I just couldn't stand the shenanigans of, of the black church. Again, and that fed into my prejudice because I was believing that religion was only something that stupid people believed, right? And this is a common thing that you hear from a lot of atheists and agnostics, whatever they choose to call themselves. You hear them sort of make this argument, right? You hear the case of the God of the gaps, as they like to call it, pretty much. God is, and this is one of the sort of one of the basic theological critiques, or talking, your more doctrinaire Marxist types. This is one of their key critiques of the religious tradition, is that pretty much God, and this is essentially Hegelian, where God is simply a reflection of man's highest ideals. There must be something that he can project externally to reflect back onto himself in such a way as to inspire him to be more than what he is. And so there's this internal battle going on within man himself. And so I kind of believe this, like, well, people just create God, they construct God as a crutch, because they quite simply don't want to deal with the hardships of life. And knowing that a God is there makes it a little bit easier to handle. And this is another reason why I rebuke the whole utilitarian aspect of or the utilitarian argument for the existence of God. Like, for example, I heard Glenn Lowry say once. Of course, Glenn Lowry is an atheist, and Glenn Lowry is a man who a lot of conservatives not so much swear by, but they at least share his content and agree with a lot of his opinions, because he says a lot of common sense things sometimes, and he does sort of stand up to the insanity of the radical left. And so a lot of conservatives, we like Glenn Lowry, right? But he said that that he's too smart to believe in God. I have a degree, and he literally said this, that I have a degree from MIT, right? You don't expect me to believe that some man, resurrected and came back from the dead. He said, I got a degree from MIT. Come on now. He said, but I do understand the power of the myth, but I'm not going to believe it. And here's what I would say to Glenn Lowry, is that I think, and again, this goes back to the entire Hellenic tradition of the philosopher, because man, whether just instinctively or whether consciously, man will always pursue truth over what he feels has a certain utility. You don't hold up myth simply because you think it works, because your curiosity will always get the best of you, and human beings would much rather live in the truth than to live in the lie, even if the lie makes them feel more comfortable. And this is why this whole notion that, well, Christianity, and even Richard Dawkins would say something similar, that Christianity is important insofar as it kind of gives us something on which to build our civilization, which is, I guess, preferable to another type of a way of living. But that is essentially a house of cards, because people will always say, screw what is useful, the truth, no matter how bad it is, just give it to me. And so this, I can't accept this idea that Christianity is valuable simply because it's useful. No, it has to be it is only valuable to the extent that it's true, because human beings will always eventually rebuke what is useful in favor of the truth. And I think that is, I think that's part of human nature. I think that's how we are. I think that's what we are. And it almost validates my belief in the existence of God, is the fact that human beings constantly try to seek Him out. C.S. Lewis, I learned that from C.S. Lewis, and he says this in Mere Christianity. Again, I know C.S. Lewis is known for a myriad of different works, of course, the Screwtape Letters, the Chronicles of Narnia. But for me, the book that he wrote that resonated the most with me was Mere Christianity. He either said it in Mere Christianity, or I may have just heard him make the comment in a documentary, or at some point, where he says that for every human appetite exists something in the physical world to um, appease his appetite, whether it's food, or whether it is his hunger, it is his thirst, it is his lust for sexual gratification, his intellectual curiosity, whatever it may be. And therefore, God too must be real, or else human beings would not intuitively seek some form of redemption, because I think that within all of us, we know that there is something out there that is far greater than we are, in a sense. And so we must try and reconcile ourselves to this fact, and try to almost rehabilitate or redeem ourselves in such a way so that we become worthy of being amongst that thing. And if that weren't true, then that instinctive drive wouldn't exist within man. There would be no God if he didn't seek him. God must be real because mankind intuitively seeks him. And it doesn't matter what your religious faith is. God is real for that reason, and for that reason alone. And mind you, you're talking about a C.S. Lewis who was once upon a time a staunch atheist. Many of your greatest religious thinkers, many of the ones that I can think of, were once upon a time atheists and heathens, going from C.S. Lewis all the way back to Saint Augustine. These were atheists and non-believers, and eventually they changed to become some of your greatest exponents or proponents of monotheism and a belief in God, whether it's Christianity or some other form. So yeah.
Wow. And we tend to grow that way as humans. You know, it could be Christianity or it could be conservatism. We're young and wild, and we're growing. We're constantly growing. We never stop growing. And then when we settle, or we just get closer to God somehow, some way, in whatever
Yeah.
take as it goes. Like for me, I was baptized into Orthodox Christianity. So
Okay.
my mom being Ethiopian, my father's Eritrean. I know you're funny because I'm American, but either which way, I'm baptized Orthodox since I was about 2 or 3 months. And my growing journey, my father, because I'm from Tri-State, I'm from Connecticut. I'm like 40 minutes away from the city, from New York. So, well, my father would take me to this church on Amsterdam in New York, in Manhattan. It was, but it wasn't consistent. And that was like when I was 12 years old. And then when I was 13 years old, my family had moved here from Phoenix, Arizona, and my aunt, which she was born Orthodox as well, but she went through she joined like Islam, she joined Catholic, different, yeah, does have. But ultimately she became Pentecostal. So she introduced me to the Pentecostal Bronx. But like, and then 14 checking out Baptist, I was confused because he was very warm and very welcoming and much older. So I think it was, um, but individually, I try to see just because I want to say,
Hey, look, you breaking up, you fading in and out. Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yeah. O said your mic going in and out. I just want to make sure it wasn't just me.
Do you guys hear me now?
Well, we heard that.
I don't know what's,
Mhm.
but yeah. So like I'm getting closer. I'm actually reading the Bible now to get more closer to it, to build my
Mhm.
relationship with God, to
Mhm.
Old Testament, and then I come into the New Testament as well through Matthew and John to get more familiar. Stop it! Oh, it said I have that Obama internet, so I could get more familiar with Jesus.
Internet.
Can't stand
He called it he said internet.
regular. You know,
What'd you say? I didn't hear that.
you didn't hear me.
I didn't hear that last portion. I don't know if you asked me a question.
This is so ghetto.
Didn't hear that. Maybe it's your internet connection. I don't know if you on Wi-Fi or what.
Okay, now
Dang, you look like you froze. Now you don't froze.
why is it doing this?
I don't know, Lenny. I'm like I said, I am not the technical expert. I wish I could help you. Oh, Biden Wi-Fi.
Why would it do this? Okay, now I think my bar
We say about your bars.
something was up with my like service. Do you hear me?
I heard you. I heard that.
Oh, this is so ghetto. Okay. Sorry.
Look, don't back on. Listen, you going lives with O, and you all over the internet, and you almost got 2,000 YouTube subscribers. Come on now, don't act nervous and shy. You do this. You do this.
First,
It's okay.
but yeah, so um I'm familiarizing myself with the Bible, getting, closer with Jesus. And I've just been on a spiritual journey when I was younger because I was confused, being
Hmm.
like three denominations, including the one I was born into, which was Orthodox Christianity. Um, I even went through like, hanging out and chopping up with guys that some of them came home from prison, or some of them were just on their own spiritual journey, particularly black men that were born Christian, but some of them became Muslim and 5%er. Um, and, in their path, it was all about them not, them trying to get some clarity and them trying to find God. And I was doing that as well. So I would always ask them questions, and I still do stuff like that. Like I feel like, the saying, like, when you find a man, find God through him, even if it's not like, even if it's just a conversation. I think it's good to learn about God through men. And I didn't understand that when I was younger, but that's quite literally what I was doing. And like I said, just like I was growing, these men were growing. Some of them were coming from jail. Some of them, thankfully, prison. um, Bro, I almost became a 5%er. And like I always say, I didn't do that ultimate thing because it kind of goes into the atheist aspect of
It is.
like it, this was me along the way. I was like, should I check out Islam, or at least Islam at that time when I was younger? It was like at least Islam had, like, they believe God. They say Allah. Now I have more of understanding now, but at that time I'm like, at least they believe in something. Whereas the
Right.
5%, even though, Clarence the 13th, he did the spin-off of Islam and he was
Mhm.
the 5%. And it's like we have the God in ourselves. And there will often be times where when I would chop it up with 5%ers and see, I know 5%ers that read the Bible, but like I said, weren't Christianity. Not to say that they followed it entirely, but that was the culture in which they were Christians. Um, but it was too extreme to the sense of not understanding. You know what I mean? Just too extreme for me. But like I always say, I myself am still part of the 5%. I'm the 5% in the sense that I like knowledge and I like to give the knowledge, know the truth. And as much as I know the truth, I'm going to give the truth. I'm not the
Mhm.
10, which 10% capitalize. They withhold information, give you information, but they're the 10%. They have, it's all about money and capital gain for them. The 85ers, they're the ones that are like oblivious and what
The dumb, deaf, and the blind.
can be
Yeah.
very, to me, that mathematic equation is very much like, I didn't cross the bridge to become a 5%er, but I'm still part of the 5%. That makes sense. So
No, no, I understand.
that's just my thing. So I would like to ask you, what do you feel about judging people's religions, whether it's something from somebody's Jewish, or, you know, whatever denomination, Wiccan, Hindu, you name it.
Well, I like you. Uh, I'm still studying and trying to figure out, trying to discover who God is through His Word, through the Bible. Um, that's the only way to, I guess, to truly get to know the nature of uh, of God. And so I'm on that journey myself. I always tell people, and I mean, people, I may say it on Cutting Through the Culture. I may say it on my own YouTube channel. I'll make it a point to say that, I am in no way, shape, form, or fashion an expert on scripture, theology and these things. And I try not to be, and the reason why, and then people sometimes get upset at me because they always say, hey, you have to, show thyself approved and all this stuff, and say, well, hey, get into it and feed more into it, equip yourself so that way you can have these debates and these conversations. I think that when I do speak about religion or Christianity, if I'm trying to defend my faith, I think I do a pretty decent job of it. But it is the respect and almost the awe and the reverence that I have for its importance, where for me it's not something to really play around with. And so I deal with another thing the cool kids say is, you got to deal with people where they at, so I kind of deal with religion where I am, and I try to only speak about things that I know, um, that I am that that I am confident that I have a good understanding and good command of. And so I tell people all the time, hey, don't come to me for you looking me to exegete and want me to break down scripture and these kind of things. I don't I try not to do that because I know that there are other people out there, and there's a whole Christian YouTube community who can, out quote me when it comes to the Bible. They'll quote me under the table, and so I don't play around with that. But as far as other people in their faith and their religion, I mean, for me, I as a Christian, I believe what the Bible says. I believe what the New Testament says about Christian, or about Jesus, who he was and what he came to do, which was essentially, I guess, to fulfill the law again, which is probably later on down the conversation we'll get into that, because it's one of the kind of market or um, the line of departure when it comes to Jews and Christians, their whole right conception of who Jesus was, and Paul's a subsequent role in terms of the proliferation and the spread of Christianity around the world. But I do believe that Jesus died for the sins of man, and I believe that those who do not believe this are incorrect. Now, if I say, well, if you are a Hindu or if you are a Muslim, then you're going to hell, for example, because those are the questions that people have. You mean to tell me, as someone who can't, you're talking about, I mean, there are all sorts of people in the world. There are people who are, illiterate, living in some obscure part of the globe. They haven't been touched by modernity, and it's kind of hard to conceive of such a thing, because you would think that our society has gone fully global. But there are some small pockets of peoples out there who, probably never seen a Bible, wouldn't know how to read it or interpret it, and they'll go their whole lives. And so, you mean, what happens to them? Do they go to hell, or what about young children who die tragically, infants and toddlers who never really got a chance to really profess?
Exactly.
Um, what happens? What happens to them? And so, or people who, like you said, grow up in a totally separate context, say like an Islamic country, where, and I get it, it's difficult to sort of break away from that, when it's all and those are things that I don't necessarily want to say that I struggle with, but there are things that I do think about. And to be fair, I believe that, and somebody will probably in a moment or two put a scripture in the chat that answers this question that I have in particular, meaning that there are countless people that have passed away before me. Right now, someone is dying as I speak somewhere, and so what becomes of them? Um, because I believe that there's a difference, of course, between being redeemed. That means someone can live an ethical life. There are many atheists out there who operate in an ethical manner as we would understand it. But are they in fact saved? Right? Someone can be ethical but not saved. And so sometimes someone who's Hindu or Muslim, Buddhist, or whatever, sometimes they can, their moral codes or the way in which they go about being in the world aligns with what a typical Christian would consider to be ethical or moral, but they just don't call their God Jesus, or they don't acknowledge the fact that Jesus died for their sins. So what becomes of that person? Um, I don't know. That's something that I think about. That's something that I struggle with. It doesn't drift me or take me away from my square in that began to question. Doesn't do that. But again, I think God, in His infinite wisdom and His patience, I think that God ultimately has a plan that I don't think any one individual, even someone who knows the Bible at the back of their hand, I think God's plan or man's perception and his finite plan sort of pales in comparison to God's ultimate plan. And so I try not to really fetter or uh, uh, kind of sit back and really think about certain things too much. I just kind of chalk it up to that and I say, listen, you know, um, God is all knowing, God is all wise, and when it's all said and done, I think being the eternal judge and the knower of all that which is good. He knows who's who and what is what and who belongs and who doesn't belong. And I can rest easy at night knowing that. For me, and I meant to mention this earlier, this is another reason why, I first in the beginning didn't believe, because I thought it was all emotional. But then when I really began to accept the fact that knowing God and having a relationship with God must first be intellectual, then that really began to change my perspective, because I started to understand. It wasn't solely about feelings, it was about really understanding. And for me, even with all that being said, and again, I'm not a religious expert, it's not where it's not my field of expertise. But from what I know about Christianity in comparison to other religions, Christianity is the path and the way that makes the most sense to me, because I don't really see any other religion offering uh, the keys or a key to salvation. I don't see any other religion doing that, and I think that, of course, the metaphysical world sort of begets the physical world, and I think that there is a reason why Christendom, as it were, became the global power that it became, was because that the European imperial and colonial powers had a conception of God that was superior to everyone else's. They had a way and an understanding and an insight, and I firmly believe that God's hands was sort of God had His hands on that process, and I think that the from the Old Testament to the New Testament, the true and actual Word of God was allowed to spread, thanks to the imperial and colonial efforts of our foremothers and forefathers. And I think that was all part of God's plan. So I know that was my long-winded response, but that's sort of how I look at it. Again, I still battle with these things in my mind. I haven't figured it out, worked it out, but I still feel as though Christianity offers the best course towards reconciliation and in the issue and the answer, in terms of how do we overcome sin. Christianity offers the best explanation.
I agree. Even so much to when I was growing up, like it's funny with me because being here in America, obviously we have numerous things, right? And then, like I said, also my ethnic background of Ethiopian and Eritrean, it's the main religions. Yes, I was baptized Orthodox, but then we also have Ethiopian Jews, we have Ethiopian Muslims, and then within the Christianity, we have the Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, Evangelist. Um, so for me, that's always made, I don't know, maybe that and just maybe my little personal character, just
Mhm.
grow like I've always like I don't judge. It was
Yeah,
in when I went to the Pentecostal church at 13 that I was told I was going to go to hell when I die if I'm not Pentecost. And you don't do that to I was still technically a child. I'm just saying as far as growing with the
yeah,
Bible, stuff like
yeah,
that could be rebellious and stuff like that can make anybody rebellious. It
yeah.
makes and I didn't deal with that with the Orthodox, which is what I was baptized into.
Mhm.
Just that I didn't finish. Me and my dad didn't, stay consistent with going to that church. But for the most part, was already established by then. I was 11. Um, I know Muslims were getting picked on, and I seen it, and even I got thrown into it. People will call me Osama bin Laden's niece and all these things. And I'm like, okay, let me go see how my read about my uncle and stuff like that. So I'm just like,
Right.
whatever that at the time because it wasn't even like Muslims were getting picked on for about a good 10, 15 years based on 9/11. And like I
Mhm.
said, one of those, I think one thing that plays a big part of me not being judgmental or telling you you're going to go to hell, whether you follow this or follow that, was the fact that I'm a very empathetic person. That's
Mhm.
just or even like I've briefly mentioned before, like originally with the Israel and Palestine war, I said that I was neutral, particularly when it comes to the war crimes, the innocent civilians. And maybe that's just me being a woman, but my thing. What I noticed between 2021 and 2023 where Muslims were upset with me. And mind you, I've always had a relationship with Muslims. Like I said, I'm East African. This is normal, like Ethiopian Jews, Ethiopian, or even the Old Testament, Ethiopia goes back to with Israel. So
Right.
it's like, what do you want me to do? You want me to just I don't know, speak bad about one or the other. But what it did to me was when I'm like, I'm like, why I got Muslims unfollowing me and all these or upset with me because I said I'm neutral. And it made a twist in my stomach, honestly, it hurt my feelings. Because like I said, I initially Muslims. Now I'm kind of like clapping back at them all the time because, my behavior is a little funny. I'm a little petty, but that's a story for
It's
another.
okay.
But I was like, I didn't understand at first because I used to always hear about radical Islam and like I'm saying, during the 9/11 days, 10 to 15 years, when I seen Muslim, it like I said, I was so empathetic that and I'm here in America. I'm not in the Middle East as far as that's concerned. So I didn't understand the radicalization and what they were talking about at that time. But like I said, fast forward 2023, when I seen Muslims upset with me because I didn't say I'm pro-Palestine in particular, it just made me, slowly by surely, day by day, I started to see something, which I'll get into that. Um, and before we break things down, I will say that Jewish people are not the problem, but rather I would say it's radical Islam, and that's not just only in America, but that could be in regions like
Over the
Scandinavia,
wood. Mhm.
um, even in Ethiopia. They want to get access to the water for maritime trade. And as you know, when it comes to war, which will break that down, a lot of these wars are based on trade and things like that, and we'll get into that. But even like Ethiopia, you have like Somalia. Ethiopia is trying to get 12 miles of water to Somaliland, which will access to the Red Sea. Uh, no, you don't. You want you, and if you do that, and they're threatening Ethiopia, but I bet you if the China man and the British man, like the Parliament, I bet you if they come through and say they want it, they'll just give it to them. They're probably gold for them, right?
Okay.
Right? Because that's what
Mm.
Africans, from the
Mm.
east to the west, north, south, they, even though it's very different, multicultural, as you know, Africans just, they're very evil. Like, to, I don't want to say it like that, but just, the division. So Nigeria, you have Muslims slaughtering Christians in
Yes,
Nigeria,
yeah,
and
yeah.
countries of genocide, eh, the countries of the world that they're very radical and they're 10 countries, five are Asian, five are number one. Eritrea. I was surprised my dad's country is number four, Eritrea. I was surprised.
What's number one, number four in terms of what? You still kind of fading in and out, so I'm trying to my best to keep up with you. What are they number four on?
The level of like the extremity of not accepting Christianity with
Oh
one
yeah. Oh yeah.
countries, I'm just saying the top 10 is just the extreme.
Yeah. Yeah, you pronounce it Eritrea. I always pronounce it Eritrea.
You say,
But you said what?
say it better than me. So
Okay. Yeah, whenever I would kind of gloss over what do they call it? The misery index or the statistics involving modern day forms of slavery. Eritrea is always on the list of just one of the worst countries as far as human rights abuses. It's a place that yeah, no one. It's I have referred myself, and this was before I even found out your ancestry. I referred to Eritrea as the North Korea of Africa. It's a very hard living. I just put it to you that way. But go ahead, finish saying what you were saying.
yeah, so it just that alone speaks volumes. You hear me?
I heard that.
That speaks, because there's even a saying in the Middle East and Africa that they know that it's called the Muslims will do away with the Christians after they have gotten through the Jews. And
Hmm.
Scandinavia, Sweden, you have Somalians, which Somalia is a Muslim Islamic state.
Hmm.
Like Ethiopia is actually like, yeah, we have like the three main religions, but Ethiopia is mostly Christian, and Christianity has their originality there
Okay.
and that. But communism is the problem, which communism either
Yeah.
which is the devil. That's still the devil. So but Somalia, Ethiopia. I mean, Sweden has Ethiopians too, but the Ethiopians don't bother the Swedish people. They're not trying
Okay.
and be demanding. Somalians are they're raping the white woman over there and doing all these, like, beating them up, and
Mm.
it's like abortion, which absolutely is, but it what they're doing, it's like the entitlement, and then you see Elon Umar over here in Minnesota. Um, it's very it's very interesting.
Mhm.
Carol and Candace Owens. I have a little theory, as I've been saying. My is that people like Candace Owens, or now Muslim convert Andrew Tate, now Muslim convert Sneeko, they're telling you, as Americans, look at the Jewish people, look at the Jewish people, look at the Jewish people. All the while, radical Islam is the real problem.
Mm.
To sit there and see that from Candace Owens, someone that told Black people that you're not the victim of the white, let's say the white Protestants and the white Catholics, if you will, or just white,
Mhm.
the Anglos, put it like that.
Yeah. Mhm.
And Black Americans or white Americans are victims to Jewish people. So you
Right.
that I'm supposed to follow the trend.
Right.
Childhood, I never judge people by their religion, even though I'm getting closer to God. That's between me and God. You know,
Mhm.
oh, you're Jewish. Like the only thing I could think of is people hating on Jewish people, and I could care what anybody says. You're mad that they stick together.
Right.
You know, like on Twitter, I got silenced in the middle of a free conversation that the anti-Semitic bill is bad, because I was asking somebody, if Jewish people play victim and cry wolf all the time, why are they so ahead in the music industry, or why are they so ahead in comedy? But they jokes on you, but they can't make jokes. And talking about all this different history of what the white man did in America to different groups, whether it's Chinese, whether they weren't inviting to the Italian and Greek immigrants during the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, or even when I was talking to you about how in New Orleans the Anglo were lynching the Sicilians and stuff, and I'm just
Mhm.
like, I wasn't doing it. I was just trying to get, because we have to understand that there's good and bad in all groups, and then when this Sicilian dude came out and verified what I was saying was right about in New whites were lynching the Sicilians, he
Mhm.
was, yeah, you're absolutely correct. And I'm so happy to be in America because I can actually get along with, other groups of people. Then when I
Mhm.
try to respond, the dude that's spreading, that Palestine is, I mean, he's telling people that Israel is creating a genocide on Palestine, which that's the narrative, as you know.
Okay.
Um, what, Liddy? What did you say? I can't hear you. Act like, I mean, I know you can't hear me, but he
Maybe he couldn't hear you.
was for, and he was like, you know what? We're about to end this conversation. And then I look back, the conversation still went on, and he was just for the most part, like the way he was acting is like he was upset with me for asking these questions, even though he
Mhm.
freedom of speech. And I'm starting to think that freedom of speech has become an oxymoron in numerous throughout America. I can't help it, but that's just my little thing as of late. And the whole judging Jewish people, like people think I'm scared of them. I'm not scared of them. How can I be scared of people
Right.
like Lydia? Uh, look at how Israel is treating the Ethiopians. Excuse me, I know Ethiopian Jew. I know nation. I feel like they try to throw a dagger. I'm not Jewish. I was born, Orthodox, but we still have a connection to Israel. So I think that like they're just like it's one thing to
Mhm.
question. You can ask me whatever you want as an individual, but they're being funny when they're asking me that question. So I understand the sense of or excuse me, Jewish people all in all of when they get because what I see is happening because I talk to like security guards, I talk to people that have been in the military just to get like a full spectrum of to what's going on, even though at first I didn't understand because we're not in the Middle East, you know what I'm saying? But one thing I do know is I keep my mouth shut if I don't know what I'm talking about,
Right.
respectfully. Um,
Right.
getting a genocide, it's either a genocide or it can't be both at the same time. And that's
Mhm.
speaking in general. It's like either you're taking one person out, I mean, their ethnic group or their group, so to speak, or you're
Mhm.
having, in this case, this
Right.
is a, so I just feel like even me, I'll get back later to what we think of the anti-Semitic bill, but I just, people saying that there's a genocide going on, they're spewing out that rhetoric.
No.
It's a huge defamation, but no,
Mhm.
it's
No. No. No, Lydia. There is no genocide of the so-called Palestinians, and I say so-called Palestinians because uh, what'd you say? What'd you
they're not,
say?
Palestine is made up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that there is no such thing as a Palestinian. And there just isn't. They've never had a history, a culture, a tradition. They've never had a king, a ruler, emperor, or anything of the sort. Of course, these were the peoples of the region of Palestine were, of course, once under the rulership of the Turkish Empire.
Mhm.
And this is, when, of course, we begin to start to talk about the political fallout from the First World War. But again, these weren't there's no such thing as a Palestinian proper. As point of fact, prior to the creation of Israel, Jews in that region were called Palestinians as well. As a matter of fact, the Arabs of the region today, let me call it Israel, if you want to include the Judea, Samaria, or the West Bank and Gaza and so on. Arab Muslims, they rejected the term Palestinian because, in their minds, Palestinian was a term that exclusively designated someone who was Jewish. And this was, common amongst Arab Muslims in the 1920s and in 1930s. And in fact, it was the Arab Muslims in the region of Palestine that first began to aggress, if that's a verb, to sort of aggress or to attack the Jews who had begun to resettle. Mind you, that there were Jews that had never left the area going back centuries, and there were some Christians there, some Muslims there, and so forth. But the region of Israel today, during the time of this migration of Jews back to their ancestral homeland, was largely barren and vacant. There's been a ton of historical documentation from Mark Twain and many of others who talked about how there was virtually nothing there. There was no prospering Arab Muslim civilization that, thanks to the aid and the help of the British Empire, all of these Jews just came in and just took this thing over. There was nothing to take over. As a matter of fact, the Jews that had resettled to the region had virtually built the society from the ground up. And it was because of, and this is what someone say, like a Theodore Herzl had predicted in the late 1800s, that this would in fact be the case, because wherever Jews tend to go, or whenever there is a decent concentration of Jewish people within a nation, within a country, that particular country tends to thrive economically. And the belief and the understanding was that Jews could be used as a tool to essentially rehab the region that had been just completely abandoned. The land was useless. At least that's the way many of people saw it. But if any group of people could turn it around, it would be Jews. Even going back as far as the 1930s, um, someone say like a Winston Churchill, I believe he made the comment. I think this may have been shortly before World War II broke out, sometime during the late 1930s. Winston Churchill has a famous quote where he says that because they were accusing Jews of engaging in genocide and these kinds of things back then, and Winston Churchill pushed back on this narrative by saying that far from being killed, far from a genocide, the Arab peoples are flourishing. And we know this for a fact because in the towns and the areas that were predominantly, if not exclusively, Arab Muslim, those populations began to decrease, and Arab Muslims were moving closer to Jews to live amongst them. For various reasons, because Jewish people just they just had a better way of living, and Arab Muslim population at that time began to population as a whole began to increase. Their overall wealth and earnings and these kinds of things, their property, their possessions, their home values, all of those things increased because of the Jewish presence there. And you had and yeah, various studies and groups from Great Britain. A lot of individuals went in to try and ascertain, right, the situation, because Arab Muslims, just it's the same way in which, for example, if you could kind of dumb it down a bit and look at the experience of blacks in the United States. There was a time when blacks, and we talk about this a lot. Our friend Chadell Jackson talks about this a lot, where blacks sort of, I can hear you.
You could like gentrification, like
Yeah. It was kind of, it was sort of like that. And Arab Muslims didn't really have. I don't want to overly simplify it, but the Jews and the Arabs in the area, and there was some Christians. They were getting along. I mean, in the beginning stages, they were getting along somewhat, relatively well. And of course, it wasn't until the British Empire. I forget the I forget the gentleman's name. Herbert Samuel. Herbert Samuel was the man in Great Britain. He was appointed the High Commissioner of Palestine, and it was Herbert Simpson who sort of gave uh, Amin al Husseini the title of the Grand Mufti, and this is what really sort of began the friction, because you had a lot of double dealing. You had Great Britain on the one hand supporting Jewish resettlement. And then you had at the same time, the British government backdoor dealing with the Arabs. to try and establish or to reestablish what's called the Caliph. Because during the time, the reign of the Ottoman Empire represented the Islamic Caliph, which was considered like the seat, the sort of global representation of the will of Allah. This was the society that was sort of carrying the standard of Islam. And so we had to, sort of figure out what was going to happen now that the Ottoman Empire has been defeated. And so what you had then is a sort of similar thing to what you have today. You had peoples throughout the West, because the British authorities were split uh, down the middle on this whole question of Zionism. Some in British Parliament, some in British authorities supported it, some didn't. And what you had was this notion that, well, we can quell the tension between Jews and Muslims if we simply placate the Muslims by sort of giving them fancy titles, giving them more of what they want. They're unhappy because they have a legitimate axe to grind, because the Jews are there doing something to them. Now, again, it was never quite established precisely what Jewish people were doing to the Arab Muslims of the region of Palestine, but they were doing something. And you had all sorts of studies from the Herb Simpson report. There's all sorts of things. And because what they saw, again, like I mentioned, they discovered that Arabs were doing quite well, but they couldn't figure out why were Arab Muslims still so upset. Well, you have to sort of give them more prestige and more control, and you had to come up with this kind of this not so much a two state, because it was meant to be a country or a nation where sort of like the Jews would have, I guess, custodialship, if that's a word, over the Holy Land, where it would be a place for all peoples of the book, i.e. Muslims, Christians, and Jews, where they could sort of come and the Jews would preserve the Holy Land. But the Arabs didn't want it that way. And they wanted to figure out, well, what's making them so angry? And then therein lies the problem, because you began to instigate Arabs into hatred towards Jews when you started giving them more and more power to sort of indulge in their anti-Jewish inclinations, because the hatred for Jews, and by extension Christians, is baked into the Islamic philosophy itself. Which is, again, something that many of people want to ignore. But anyway, it's a lot of history there. And so when Candace Owens, because you mentioned her, and the interview that she had with Rabbi Shmuley, and he didn't, and that's funny, because that one snippet, that one clip, when she asks Smuley to define what anti-Semitism is, and he sort of he starts tripping.
Sorry.
Go
That's
ahead, jump
that's
in.
that's I don't know his name, but that's the other rabbi. That's not Rabbi Shmuley is the one that um she was basically linking him to the death of Michael Jackson, and then he got, I don't know if you're on Twitter to see like the backhand, but Rabbi Shmuley is the one that she said like he has a toy shop with his daughter, and Rabbi Shmuley is a different rabbi.
Mhm.
And I'm just saying that I'll get back to that, but
Oh, okay.
I know what you talk about, the one that it seemed like he was talking down to her, and he
The
like,
the one guy, I didn't watch the whole interview, but he was the guy. I think he had went onto her platform, and they were having a conversation, and many people took it as though, I guess it was somewhat of a debate or whatever, or, it got kind of debate-ish at points during the conversation or the interview, and particularly the moment where Candace Owens asked him to define anti-Semitism, and he didn't answer. I understood what he meant, and the reason why I understood what he meant in his response was because I considered myself to be someone who understands the history of anti-Semitism. Again, I don't necessarily like to use the term anti-Semitism when I talk about it. I simply refer to it as Jew hatred, because the term anti-Semitism didn't come into play until about the 1870s, 1880s. It was much later. But you did in fact have a lot of sort of anti-Jewish sentiments in various societies across the world, going back, of course, to the days of the Roman Empire, and from the time of Jesus moving forward. And so the reason why that rabbi had a difficult time, or perhaps he again couldn't explain it quite that well, and again, Candace Owens made it seem as though you can't objectively define anti-Semitism. Hence, it means whatever it is that you want it to mean, in just so long as the charge of anti-Semitism can act as some form of political expediency. And so herein lies the problem with a lot of Black conservatives like Candace Owens. So go back to this whole thing. You raised a good point. That's Candace Owens and other people like her are always talking, and rightfully so. And I agree with them when they say that there is no grand white supremacist conspiracy. You're not being systemically held back by the white man and all this stuff. But at the same time, you kind of, whether directly or indirectly, you may imply that there isn't some white boogeyman behind the curtain, but there is a white Jewish man behind the curtain. And so this seems to be a bit hypocritical. But here's what they'd probably say, and this is what many of them think, especially when it comes to the concept of anti-Semitism, because they say, well, here's the thing. Jewish people are able to, by and large, amass their fortune. And when I say fortune, I don't mean like every Jewish person is walking around with millions and billions of dollars. But Jewish people do quite well for themselves, and the reason being is because they're the ones who are playing up their sense of victimhood for the purpose of to gain social currency, or for the purpose or for the sake of political extortion. And this is sort of like the charge. And so he can't define anti-Semitism because he wants to keep it fairly vague, so that the definition of anti-Semitism can change whenever someone who is using it sort of wants to use it for whatever situation they find themselves in, if they're looking to get over. So this kind of plays into this whole notion that the Jew is just intrinsically conniving and sneaky. Now, this is a stereotype about Jewish people. Again, this is a stereotype about Jews that goes back centuries. When I just recently posted a reel on my Instagram page, and I put in over the top, I said the liberal roots of Jew hatred from the Enlightenment to the present day. And the reason why is because it isn't so much that Jewish people can't define anti-Semitism. It's the opposite. It's that the people who make allegations about the Jews and their nefarious and untoward dealings, they're the ones who cannot adequately define anti-Semitism, insofar as they can't tell you exactly what Jewish people are doing, apart from what other human beings may do, given the fact that when you strip away all of the superficiality or the trivial kind of trappings that kind of make us different on the surface, all human beings, right, are susceptible to bad behavior. So it can't necessarily tell you exactly what Jewish people are doing. And so he can't define anti-Semitism because they can't necessarily define anti-Semitism, because, as I like to call it, Jew hatred exercise, or it manifests itself at different times by way of different people and for different reasons. During the Middle Ages, you had anti-Semitism in a lot of Christian countries, right? It goes all the way back to the blood libel in the killing of Saint Hugh. You had the story of Jews vandalizing St. Stephen's Cathedral in France. You had this idea during the spread of the bubonic plague that it was the Jews who were responsible for the Black Death. Why? Because Jewish people weren't getting sick as much as others, and so it must be the Jews that are doing something to other non-Jews, and as a result, Jews who hadn't contracted the bubonic plague were at times gathered up and put to death because they were blamed for having been the culprits responsible for the spread of the bubonic plague. Mind you, there was no evidence to support this, but this is what they believed. And go back during the Hellenic period in Rome, and then shortly after the fact, there were some Christians who believed that the Jews were, and this was kind of like the beginning. Well, not so much the beginning, because I'm gonna get to what I think the beginning of it all, where it all sort of began. But at least
500, like 500 to 50.
like after there was a point when Christianity was in its early phases, and it became this small group of what they would probably call a cult back then, and it became this power, this thing that the world had never seen as far as its influence, its cultural, political, economic influence even. But in the beginning period, and many of Christians somewhat still believe this, once again, is that the Jews are responsible for committing the ultimate crime, and that ultimate crime is killing God. And so the Jews are responsible for deicide. Thus, there's always this, and so that's where the myth sort of like began. But even prior to Jesus's crucifixion, when you had all different types of cultural and political rivalries that existed within the Roman Empire, the Jews were kind of looked at sideways by many of folk for their monotheism, because it was God coming into the world, right? There's just this kind of this revelation, right, of what or who, in fact, God actually was, as it was sort of communicated down the line of Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. And so you had, your non-monotheistic pagans, if you will, particularly in the Roman Empire, who sort of looked at the Jews as being sort of set apart from everyone else, because they had their own sort of unique trends and traditions that were separate from the pagan world that existed concurrently around them. And so Jews have always been sort of rejected for their monotheism during a time when this belief in a more pantheistic conception of the gods and the goddess and so on and so forth, this was popular opinion amongst the ruling elites, not just in Rome, but in other parts of the world as well, all throughout the Eastern Hemisphere, from Africa to Asia and so on. But the Jews were different. And so this all kind of began. This is how this sort of thing all began. And so it all depends on who you're talking about, because the Romans hated the Jews for a very specific reason. Christians throughout the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, if you want to call it the medieval times, they hated Jews for very separate reasons. And it wasn't until, say, for example, now in here, I'll pass the mic, that then during the Enlightenment in the late 18th century, the two main, I guess, historical events that took place that really sort of exemplified this the growth, or the sprouting from beneath the soil of the ideas of the Enlightenment were, of course, the revolutions that happened in the United States and the revolution that happened in France. Now, understand that from the standpoint of what would be at the forefront, or who would be at the tip of the spear when it came to the development of Western philosophy or Western civilization as a whole, for the longest time, England was at the tip of the spear of Western development. Even when you had other rivals, other imperial powers that rivaled England, England was at the tip of the spear, because there was something unique and different about English culture, apart from even French culture. There was something different about English culture. This is why every nation, whether it be the United States, Canada, or Hong Kong, other parts of Asia, Canada or Australia, New Zealand, these places, Places that were once were formerly English colonies tended to fare better once they gained their independence because they learned the ways of the English. Well, after the Enlightenment, there was a switch, and for reasons that I probably don't have time to get into, England retreated from the world stage from that point of view and absconded from their responsibility as the global exemplar for this kind of superior or supreme version of culture. And what began to surpass the English way of seeing things, the Anglophile or the Anglo-Saxon way of seeing things, was the Germanic way of seeing things, so to speak. So when you fast forward, this is what ultimately led to the global conflict, which was so massive. It happened on so massive a scale that it had to be broken up into two separate parts. Because make no mistake about it, the World War I and World War II was one long continuous war. They just simply took a respite. And what the First World War was about was simply, if we were going, and we, I mean we as in the whole world, essentially, of course, being led by these various European nation states. But the question became, would we continue to go the way of free market capitalism, or would we abandon a more socialist-esque planned economic model, okay, that was dreamt up or thought up by students of the Enlightenment? This is the reason why Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, co-authors of the Communist Manifesto, the first book I believe that they penned together was a book called The German Ideology, which was, again, the patriarch, the progenitor of the German ideology was Friedrich Hegel. So I like to quote Friedrich von Hayek, the author of the famous book Road to Serfdom. He was an Austrian economist who fled Austria and went to England, where he studied at the London School of Economics, and he would go on to challenge the Fabian Society on many of economic issues. Said that in the 19th century, to quote, to the intelligentsia, socialism became the heir apparent to the liberal tradition, unquote. So hence began the rise within Western civilization of the intellectual and spiritual dominance of secular humanism. And it was secular humanism of the 19th century uh, that again led to the global conflict in the First and Second World Wars. But within the context of secular humanism, there was a lot of Jew hatred as well. Because what a lot of people don't tend to, because we like to think that Karl Marx, for example, is a betrayal of the West of Western civilization. Because when you think Western civilization, you think of Adam Smith and Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant. These are the people that you think about. Uh, but John Locke and so on. But as an extent, and even to an extent, someone like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But as the Western liberal idea from the time of the Enlightenment began to evolve, you began to see the encroachment of a lot of poisonous ideas. And Karl Marx is just as much a product of the Enlightenment or Western civilization as someone say like an Adam Smith. And also what coincided again with the rise and the public profile of a Karl Marx with another Charles, because of course Karl is German for Charles, was Charles Darwin. Hence, what you had in the 19th century with the rise of secular humanism was racial Darwinism. And this is when the liberal sciences took from the Darwinian methodology and attempted to apply a kind of social Darwinism. And with that being said, when you had throughout the 19th century these various revolutions inside of Europe proper, that's when you began to see this blend of this quest for national identity, which was exemplified in Germany eventually. Prior to it was Prussia and so on. But there was this intense kind of militaristic devotion to civic and national character. You couple that with this idea that came out of the Enlightenment of economic planning, hence in Germany, the concept of National Socialism was born. But within the context of all of that which was going on, the Jews too became the the fall guy of secularism, because it was the Jew who was the one who was prospering the most from this idea of free market capitalism. And so, if we're going to have planned economics, we have to stop the Jew from engaging in his predatory acts. Again, couple that with this idea of racial Darwinism, and everything sort of became about race and these ill-perceived characteristics as it relates to the Jew became synonymous with his race. And then fast forward to the 1870s, the concept, the term anti-Semitism was invented by a German by the name of Wilhelm Burr. He was the founder of an organization called the League of Anti-Semitism, and he talked about how I think in his most famous book, his magnum opus, I think was titled "The Way of Victory for Germanicism over Judaism." Because it was Judaism that was sort of diluting the German character. Again, because people were beginning to embrace these ideas and these sorts of things. But again, Jews thought that they could find a way that we could assimilate and kind of, into, because you had Jews all over Europe, you had Jews all over the Middle East, and so on. And so Jews, disproportionate to their actual numbers, had a very high public profile because they were very successful, because there is something unique within Jewish culture that sort of makes them this way. But instead, what those on the outside looking in did was they created this caricature of a Jewish person, because, of course, human beings are susceptible to negative emotions insofar as they are envious of those who are more successful than they are. And so Jews who were at a point in time, thanks to and I even mentioned this in my previous YouTube show, because I talked about the Napoleonic Wars briefly, because Napoleon even made this famous declaration upon a time when he said that the Jew as an individual, something to the effect where I'm paraphrasing Napoleon, he says that the Jew as an individual, yes; as a nation, no. What Napoleon was trying to say is, Napoleon declared, treat the Jew as an individual, not as a group. These are individual people, and you shall treat them as such, not as a nation. So what Napoleon was saying in so many words is, treat them equally, treat them as you would like someone to treat you. And so again, and mind you, this was for, and a lot of these Enlightenment ideas were a lot of these ideas were coming out of the French, because Napoleon and the French, by and large, saw it as their, so in a sense, manifest destiny to spread these Enlightenment ideas. Fast forward a few decades after the fall of Napoleon, is when you began to see these nations where Jews for a time had been accepted, thanks to Napoleon and his conquering of a lot of these European territories. Jews then became the convenient scapegoats all over again. And then that's when you began to see calls for the establishment of a Jewish state.
Wow.
So I know I just said a lot.
Oh, no.
Um, so anyway.
I guess I'll take it a few hundreds back. I'll go back into the medieval times in the Dark Age, which was to 1500, talking about scapegoat with the Jewish. So
Mhm,
I briefly are constantly saying usury, usury, usury,
mhm,
where Bible, you're not supposed to do usury. You're not supposed to add in your brethren, or your own, if you will. But being,
mhm,
it's actually funny because basically the Bible to the Torah and to the Quran, you're not supposed to do usury.
mhm,
Medieval times in those European countries, uh, have the Jews do it. Now the people made a choice. At the same time, because they wanted to cast them out and not allow them privileges of having trade or ownership and things in that retrospect. Okay, me, or I'm giving you a loan of $2,000 or whatever. At that time, I don't know, $10, whatever.
I
That
get you.
no, but like you thinking like, okay, if I give you 2,000, you give me 2,000 back. But with it's like risk the lending, so to speak, and they got blamed for capitalism because of that. But
Mm.
it's for the capitalism of like, what do you? So they're not supposed to have trades or do anything in their life, to be sustainable. But they give so that they can sustain from that for their families. So we can go into Jesus Christ, the Romans and the Jews, or you can say the Italian, because this is very biblical and historical, but it also goes into what we see right now. Oh, the Jew banks and da 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 da. But it's like it's not that it's like because even at that time during the medieval times, after the Jewish people started doing it, the Italians started doing it,
Yeah.
started minting
Hmm.
coins,
Hmm.
and then the British bankers that's why I always say it's not that I'm trying to undermine anybody's level of greed, because greed can come upon anybody in the flesh, as long as it doesn't matter your religion or your skin color or your whatever, wherever you come from. So like, look at this, like bankers. Okay, I just recently found out Bank of America was Italian.
Italian. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like going back to me being in the tri-state, the Jews and the Italians, they're always hand in hand.
Mhm.
You talk about the Romans, whether you talk, it's up some way, bad and the ugly, they always go hand in hand. Even in the Roman Empire, from a historical aspect, thing and the migrating and conquering and everything like that. And it's very much like, yeah, we could say it's history, but it's also very much for the here and the now. And I don't understand why people, it's like me when I think of the death of Jesus Christ, and I ask the question, who are we to blame? The Jews, because yeah, obviously they gave up Jesus Christ, but then also Pontius Pilate, I can't say this name. I know I'm talking the government.
Contents. Hmm.
Yeah, even it's about
Declare
like
your militant.
you have choices, right? So
Yeah.
even though they want to, we felt like Jesus was innocent. They still, so I said on the Jews and on the Romans. I don't just, oh, it's just the Jewish people, or it's just the Romans. I don't uh you know and it's so deep and spiritual that that's what I'm saying. Go
Well, well.
ahead.
No, go ahead. I didn't know if you was finished. Go ahead. I'm gonna cut you off. You still going? Keep cooking.
Spiritual and historical, but it's still very much current.
Hmm.
Behavior, being in the flesh. Oh, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. And I just wanted, like, I'll wrap up my part, but like with the Jewish people, it's like, oh, they're playing victims just like the black community. And even to go into cutting through the culture, when you guys were talking about it last week, I remember people were, or some, I think it was somebody asked you guys, and then you answered and Blanche answered at that point, like, why are Jewish people called communists? um I would say, why did they get blamed for capitalism?
Definitely.
Why
Hmm.
did they get blamed for communism? But
Yeah.
consistent. You talk about one Jew, you talk about, but when you think of the word communism, if you were to use one word to define communism, what would that be? One. Like like it's just like one. Like China is one, or the one could be like the easiest word to describe communism.
Hmm.
And Jews are one.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And it
Hmm.
just the definition, it kind of piggybacks off of one another with Jewish, that they're
Hmm.
all communists, but they are definitely one. And when we think of the words like communism and socialism, we've been seeing people, they just came across this word and they're starting to use it very loosely. You
Right.
they're like, just know what you're
Well, yeah, I said that before. Yeah, and I think a lot of it is people are. I think for the first time, I don't know. I just joined in on the conversation within over the last couple of years. These are the types of things that I would talk to certain people, friends of mine in private, those who I felt were, or just those who wanted to have the conversation. And when I would explain to them, uh, that hey, America is going down a path right now. I mean, I'd say I would even use terms like communism. When I would use these terms, people would look at me, and I don't want to say all, but they were confused because people literally. I mean, you would think it seems common to us because this is what we do, but most folks, particularly most Black folks, are so uninformed. They don't know what that is. They don't know what it is. They don't know what it means. And even if you were to explain it to them, then give them the what's those books, the Cliff Notes version of what communism is, or Communism for Dummies, like those old books they used to have. Probably still sell them. They wouldn't even know. And this is why you got to break it down in layers. I was having a conversation with my barber today, and he asked me, well, why do you vote Republican? Like, explain it to me. He was just like, he wasn't trying to debate me. He was like, you crazy. He was just like, bro, I don't do politics. It's not my thing. And I'm just interested in hearing your take, bro. I want to learn. And I just said, man, I just shook my head because I'm like, I don't even know where to begin because there's so much deprogramming I have to do. If you were to explain to a person what communism is, they wouldn't even know. I dare I say that most folks wouldn't even know why it was bad, even if you explained it. They would say, okay, well, I still don't get it. And so you're really fighting this sort of steep uphill battle. But for a lot of Black folks today who I think are starting to get it, and they're seeing, like, for example, even me in my content, I'm doing I'm circling back, and I'm going after, I say going after, but just kind of giving a different perspective on a lot of our great Black leaders and heroes and so on. And you see, behind a lot of these Black leaders and Black movements, of course, is someone Jewish, some Jewish socialists, or some Jewish Marxist communists. And so a lot of Black conservatives who are riding this neo-populist wave that was, I think, brought in by Donald Trump's political ascendance. I don't think they have even fully dealt with this concept or the history of communism in a way that would even make them somewhat, I guess, competent enough to, I guess, sort of expound upon it for any length of time with some degree of with any degree of sort of a seriousness or anything of in depth or substantive. But they just see that there's been a lot of Jewish manipulation going on, sort of like behind the scenes. And so the funny thing is that now that you have a lot of conservatives are on this whole anti-Marxist kick, and they see that white Marxist Jews have been working in conjunction with Black Marxists, who we've been programmed into essentially worshiping these people or believing that these people were these great men and women. They're saying, well, they're pointing at Jewish people and saying, ah, ha, ha, you think that what you're doing, you're so pro-Black, but everything that you're saying and you're thinking exactly how a white Jew wants you to think. But the irony that those people don't see and they don't seem to understand is they too are thinking exactly like a white Jewish communist would want them to think, because it was white Jewish communists that introduced this modern day conception of anti-Semitism into the popular political landscape. Because Karl Marx was anti-Jewish. So was the founder of the Austrian Communist Party in 1918, I believe was the year, was a communist, a female who was in fact Jewish by the name of Ruth Fisher, who prior to the Nazi Party cracking down on communists once Hitler came to power, you had a lot of, or those who became members of the Nazi Party, a lot of their youth, the Nazi youth, a lot of them were in fact former communists. It was easier to induct them, to pluck them into the Nazi movement because they were communists first. And so someone say like a Ruth Fisher introduced this idea to a lot of young German Nazis, when Nazis and German Nazis and German communists were sort of still somewhat congenial. They were able to sort of coexist at that particular point. But she told them to, in no uncertain terms, to go after the Jew, the Jew, and she instructed the Nazis to hang them from lampposts. There is some talks that the man I mentioned earlier, Wilhelm Burr, there is some who believe that he was in fact a Jew. Other sources say he was not. But again, guess who was in fact a native German, the progenitor of the Protestant Reformation and the rebellion against the ecclesiastical dominance of Roman Catholicism was Martin Luther. And of course, you don't have to be an expert historian to know the full depth, or maybe perhaps a lot of people don't know the full depth of Martin Luther's anti-Semitism. If you were to take the writings of Martin Luther and line it up with Hitler's own words in Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, it would seem as though Adolf Hitler took a lot of his talking points directly from Martin Luther. And so this is this whole German history, this whole sort of German trajectory. And Karl Marx himself even had praise for Martin Luther, because he thought that the rebellion against the Catholic Church marked a major step in the dialectical process toward the eventual abolition of all religion. And so for all of these these new kind of anti-Marxist conservatives who are trying to shout down the Jews and making like the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, well, their Jewish hatred, their Jew hatred sounds extremely like the very same communist Jews that they claim that they claim to be railing against. Because there was Jew hatred on the communist side, and there was also, I guess, I don't so-called Jew hatred, if you will, on the more, I guess, conservative Jewish side, who, again, these Jews who were, your conservative type, say like a Milton Friedman, or an intellectual, say like an Alan Bloom, for example. These men weren't anti-Semitic. These men weren't self-hating Jews, as they would call. These were men who were trying to point out the dangers of collectivism, the dangers of economic planning, and how these socialist ideas, would lead to tyranny and despotism. And so they were called anti-Semitic because of it, the same way in which peoples, blacks and or whites, by that on the flip side of that token, because you did have black and whites who were critical of communism in the days of the McCarthy era. You're talking 1940s, 1950s, and whatnot. The Communist Party was seen to be the political organ that was doing the most to help blacks gain equality in the United States. So a person who was against the Communist Party was against the advancement of black people. That was the idea. That was the notion that was being popularized by black communists. And so if you were against communism, you were against black people. If you were against communism, you were against Jewish people, right? If you were against communism, you were a supporter of the Ku Klux Klan. These were the popular talking points of communists within their Soviet-backed propagandists. Those were the talking points of communist propaganda. And again, you flip it, you turn it over, and then these very same Jewish communists and non-Jewish communists again would blame Jews for their conspiratorial ways in which they went about manipulating the credit system so that they can get wealthy by exploiting people. And you had all of these geographical changes that were brought about by the growth, by the Industrial Revolution, the creation of major cities, the movement of peoples. And this was a major psychological and it posed an existential crisis for many of people who watched the Industrial Revolution and the effects that it had on Europe. And this is why a lot of people took to the Marxist doctrine because of the just kind of dumbing it down a bit, because of the gross changes that were brought upon by the Industrial Revolution. And so the Soviet Union and the communists were, that was, though, that side of the whole, as far as political ideology, they were the ones that were doing the most for black people. And even someone like a Malcolm X believed this. Malcolm X even said, as he said, glowing things about Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler, and said that these two particular regimes, even W.E.B. Du Bois once said of the Third Reich, that Adolf Hitler's Germany was the greatest example of democracy in the known world. And this was a popular refrain amongst a lot of black leaders at the time, before that pesky little World War II thing broke out. Um, yeah, I think that a lot of black people who who learned the term communism just a week ago, who are now all of a sudden saying "F the Jews, F the Jews," they just don't know what they're talking about, and they do not know the full depth and all the nuance and the complexities of the growth of this ideology called communism. It's in the role that Jewish people sort of play in it, the role of academia, the role of various wars and things of that nature that happened in the 1960s. I mean, in the 19th century, amongst these different factions. And so a lot of these anti-Jewish ideas that were gaining traction in Germany, a lot of Arab Muslims learned of these ideas, and began to really embrace them, and to sort of go about a certain political strategy, if you will, to help undermine the prevalence of European imperialism. And so everything as a result became this. So everything from this, so I call it Islamic liberation. All of this stuff, this whole kit and caboodle, is simply about how we kind of win how do we win the day in terms of kind of fighting back these this kind of notion of white supremacy and European colonialism and all these things. And so they have all hands on deck in the fight to try and reclaim the globe from the negative and nefarious influences of Western imperialism. And so I know I just said a mouthful, but again, Jews are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And considering the fact that Judaism serves a dual function, it functions as both an ethnicity of sorts and as a religion. Even those who openly renounce their Judaism, say like a Noam Chomsky today, or a Karl Marx prior to him, and others, they are still Jewish nonetheless, even though they rebuke the customs of they rebuke their Jewish tradition. And bear in mind, going back to what I said earlier about how the Jews, Hebrews, Israelite, whatever, call them what you like, how they brought, right, the tradition of Jehovah, Yahweh, the one and only, the true God, the sense that sort of bringing this biblical morality to the fore. And again, I know that Jews and Christians deviate at some point, but Judaism and Christianity are the only two religions in the world that share a holy book in common. We have the Old Testament in common because the Old Testament is sacred to both Jew and Christian. No other two religions in the world can say that. And so when biblical morality is brought into the world, this is the crisis of the Marxist, because the Marxist believes that however we conceive of morality is simply a byproduct of class interests, right? And so even Jews, you can be Jewish, but a secular Jew is going to reject his Judaism because he rejects the whole idea of a God that sets forth before anything else this eternal conception, or these sort of transcendent values that are true for time immemorial. They reject this because, of course, morality manifests itself on a circumstantial continuum, and this is what they believe. And so, if you are Jewish and you reject this, or you're Jewish and you reject God, uh, you're still Jewish, right? So therein lies the problem. And so for those who are non-Jewish, we blame the Jews for communism, but we don't blame secularism, if you will, for how blacks or how any group of people in any country kind of falls into this trick bag of believing that socialism is the way to prosperity, or whatever it is that they're seeking. Um, Jews are still Jews no matter what they believe. Christians, for example, are not Christians if they cease to believe as the Bible teaches from the perspective of a Christian. And so no one can come in the name of Jesus preaching liberation theology. He gets dismissed as being a heretic, i.e., he is not really a Christian. But someone who is Jewish who peddles in Marxism, you can't disavow him of his Judaism, because Judaism is both an ethnicity and a religion. And so therein lies the problem. But left-wing Marxist Jews, someone say like a Karl Marx, isn't any more Jewish than I am. I'm just as, if Karl Marx was a Jew, then, I'm the king of Zanzibar. Nothing Jewish about Karl Marx, not to mention the fact that, of course, this is Karl Marx, converted to Protestantism before he became a militant atheist. And so is Karl Marx, is his attitudes and ideas the result of him being Jewish? Maybe they are the result of him being Protestant. We
You-
don't ask ourselves that question.
right? Like you could be Protestant, you could be secular, and be worldly.
Yeah, exactly. But Jews don't get that, don't have that. The Jews don't have that luxury, unfortunately. And again, as I mentioned, even I did a cut to the culture last week. That it wasn't until the Holocaust that you began to see almost like a universal Jewish identity, where being Jewish became something that was somewhat homogenous, even though Jewish people, they're different. There are differences among them, whether it be national differences, sectarian differences, and so on. There are differences, but when it comes to the whole Holocaust thing, and again, how we look at World War II and how we look at the role of the Holocaust and how it has shaped not just the policy of the United States, but in large part, I mean, you're talking about the consequences of World War II was so, I mean, it can't possibly be understated, with the creation of the UN and all these kinds of things. Uh, our ideas about the Holocaust, and those who, I don't want to say question, because it's fair to have a healthy deal of skepticism when it comes to anything, but a lot of the misconceptions about the inner workings of the Holocaust were popularized by Soviet propagandists who wanted to sort of paint this picture of the Jewish people in order to help spread their atheistic ideas. Because make no mistake about it, both Jews and Christians were persecuted under the dictates of Joseph Stalin. And in the beginning, when Israel was coming into being, Joseph Stalin saw an opportunity because Israel was started by socialists. It was. I mean, even not so much being specific and unique to Israel, parliamentary government is more purely democratic than the Republican system that we have here today. This is why you see, European politics is similar to American politics, but it's different in that you see more of a socialist-esque kind of strain in their brand of parliamentary politics, different from what we have here. But Joseph Stalin saw a kind of kinship post the Holocaust between all Jews, which he severely wanted to stamp out. And he died shortly thereafter. But this is one of the key reasons why, and aside from them sort of jousting for power, but this is why Leon Trotsky, who was born Lev Bronstein, was an ethnic Jew, became an enemy of Joseph Stalin, the native Georgian, who again began his career in seminary. He was going off to become a priest until he read the works of Charles Darwin, and it turned Joseph Stalin into an atheist. Well, part of the reason why he shunned Trotsky, and of course Trotsky went on the run, and Stalin eventually tracked him down and had him assassinated in Mexico. But Joseph Stalin hated Leon Trotsky because he was Jewish. And Joseph Stalin said, okay, screw the Jews. We need to bring the hammer down on them more severely, because Joseph Stalin believed that he had successfully eviscerated any kind of religious connection amongst Jews. He thought he had gotten rid of that. But when he found out he didn't, that's when he did a 180-degree turn and began to oppose Israel in favor of their enemies, which were Arab Muslims, not just simply the people of what we call Palestine today, but we're talking about the creation of the what they called the Arab League in 1945, which was composed of about 6 majority Muslim states who all unilaterally declared war against the tiny state of Israel, which is about the size of my backyard. It wasn't just this quote unquote Palestinians. Palestinians are the kind of the propaganda buffer which gives the united Arab world an excuse to continue to wage a war against their eternal enemies, which goes back to the Bible and the story of Isaac and Ishmael. But
Yeah.
anyway,
That was important to say because it's like those surrounding countries, they let go at Israel, and then the it, so you hear people, not just Israelis or Jewish people, or even a number of
hold on, Liddy, you breaking up bad? Nah, I ain't heard you for about the last 5-10 seconds.
I don't know. Okay, do you hear me? I don't know. You hear me?
I get it. Yeah, I get you. Like I said, you've been fading in and out the whole live stream, but I'm trying to keep up. So I apologize if I get lost, if something gets lost in translation. But
Yeah, but what
Mhm.
I'm saying, or Israelis or Jewish people are saying that Israel has a right to defend itself.
Mhm.
There's that people are like because of the boogeyman or Hollywood or the bankers are going to kill them, and like going into what you were saying, like these regions, including the
Hey, Liddy, I can't hear you at all. Nah, I'm sorry. I don't want you to keep talking in vain, because when you're done, I'm gonna be like, what? You was probably cooking too. I ain't hear nothing you said.
why my audio is I don't know what's going on. I don't know why my audio is.
I don't know. Maybe you muted. I don't know. But look, we got about maybe 15 more minutes, and then I gotta take off. So
Do,
this should give you a to forewarn you. Say that again.
do you hear me? No.
I heard you just ask me, did do I hear you? I heard that.
So it's when it comes to war, whether it's
Mhm,
Israel, Palestine, or you
mhm,
could Vietnam, you could talk World War II, etc. Because we kind of touched in those years.
mhm.
Um, is there ever peace?
I mean, are you saying has there ever been peace, or will there ever be
I
peace?
touched base with you, like
Mhm,
in terms of pretty much because you reminded me about to war. You know, he and then he ended up going, kind of stripped him from his championship and stuff. And my father, when I was talking to him, I'm like, why did they force Muhammad Ali to go to war? And then my
mhm,
father, like, he was like, you have to fight for your country, you fight. you fight. And my father,
Okay.
he's now.
Okay. All right.
What is that all about?
So okay, so let me address. So I caught. I think I caught most of what you're saying. I thought you started off by saying I kind of remind you of your father in terms of, I guess, my opinion on this whole thing about war and defending your country, and then you brought up Muhammad Ali. So pretty much like, how do I feel about people expressing their autonomy and their right to reject conscription? Um, I think it's one of those things that again, it's another one of those complicated questions. Um, on the one hand, from a libertarian point of view, conscription, right? I mean, your person, your body is, of course, an example of an extension of your property, and so for someone to compel you under the penalty of law, or imprisonment, or whatever, taxation and these sorts of things, you could say, well, that is, that is against the very principle of classical liberalism, in this idea of the rights of the individual, right? On the other hand, you say, well, well, we need people to stand up and fight for country. We need people who are willing to defend country. And so, where do you draw the line? I will say that I believe that a country is stronger when its men are have to. I mean, again, I'm not saying that from a policy point of view I am in favor of mandatory military service. I think they have something similar to that in Israel. I think the young men in Israel have to serve, and everyone has to serve in their military. Even the women, I think, it's for a time. But I could be totally wrong on that. But Israel, of course, is such a small country, and its population, it's so small that it's like every Israeli citizen is sort of mandated to kind of join the IDF if need be, at a point, if they're not forced into being just members, even during times of quote unquote peace, even though there's really never any peace in that region. But
I
um,
you know that more of the Jewish Israeli, because you know how in Israel there's Christian, there's
yeah,
Abraham
there's Muslims.
military, that the Jew, it's like for Israelis military. Like, Israelis are not as much in the war like the Jews.
hmm
So it's okay. The Jews did this. The Jews did that. Um, not that.
Man, let me get back.
Yeah,
Let me get back to what I was saying. I'm not trying to like ignore you. I heard you. I think that you were saying about how Israeli Jews aren't correct. Because I'm trying to like read your lips a little bit. Where I think you were saying like Israeli Jews are not the only ones, I guess, responsible for a lot of these.
are not fighting as in the military. Like who's being in it?
Dang, I ain't hear nothing you said, man. You breaking up so bad. Because I want to hear your point about the Israeli military,
I
but I can't hear.
do another live eventually.
Yeah, we could do another line. Let me just finish up. Table that, and maybe we could try again next week or a week or two or something. But again, I don't know if I have the answer to that question. I think that the issue, of course, cannot be solved. My, my lawn care people outside cutting my grass. You may be able to hear these lawnmowers, but I don't think the question can be solved vis-a-vis policy. I don't think that the question or the solution is to force men to join the military. I think that the issue, of course, is one of culture. Because I think the principle of patriotism, you hear the old slogan of, how's it go, God, family, and country, and these things. Even I read another one again. I am one who is not the Catholic tradition, but I truly admire the the opinions of our Archbishop Fulton Sheen. And in Fulton Sheen's book, the conscious of the West, or the consciousness of the West, he makes it a point to say that anyone who is not loyal to family isn't loyal to country. And he kind of, I forgot how he words it, but he comes up with a way in which to make this analogy between commitment as a man, as a father to family, with that of a commitment to country. And it's deep the way he says it. And he says that you cannot expect a man who is unwilling to sacrifice for his country. You cannot expect him to be the same in the home, right? And vice versa. I think that in order to kind of that Muhammad Ali spirit, I haven't done a whole YouTube show about Muhammad Ali yet. I probably will. But Muhammad Ali is another false idol, another false icon. He was a great boxer. Part of me admires him for his conviction, even though, his, when I say conviction, I mean, his stance and him sort of standing 10 toes down. Although he was under duress from the Nation of Islam, so the story goes, because after Malcolm X's assassination, he feared that if he did not obey the dictates of the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that they could possibly, that they would come after him. So the story goes that he met privately with Sugar Ray Robinson, who instructed Muhammad Ali that he should, in fact, go to Vietnam. And Sugar Ray Robinson tells the story that Muhammad Ali was just this young, impressionable kid in his early 20s who was sort of terrified, more so of the Nation of Islam than he was of the federal government. And, he knew that if he did, in fact, join up to sort of fight the white man's wars, that it wouldn't be a good look for him domestically. And so the jury is still somewhat open, and I don't think we'll ever know the truth behind why Muhammad Ali actually objected to the war. But even if you go back and listen to a lot of his commentary involving American society, politics, and culture, and these sorts of things, Muhammad Ali he was a moron. He was not a smart man. He just was not. I know it hurts feelings, and know people, but he was not a smart man. He was not a smart man. Um, but to go back to this to your question, in order for us to kind of get rid of that notion, that idea, I think people have to get back to God. And I don't know, maybe if you sift through the book of Romans, and it tells you the role of the government and the state, and about wielding the sword, and these sorts of things. I think that young men. I mean, even you look at the era of World War II, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, during or in the wake of this new sort of isolationism that was sort of gripping American foreign policy after the First World War. Uh, you had young men as young as 17 spring into action. I mean, there are countless stories of 16, 17-year-olds who snuck into the military. Many of them sort of lied about their age, forged their birth records, all sorts of things, because they wanted to go confront Mussolini, Hitler, and Tojo. And then when you see the cultural rot that was brought about by this sort of neo-Marxist Frankfurt School-esque kind of communism in the 1950s and 1960s, and everyone became so nihilistic and despondent, no one was willing to fight for country anymore. At least there was a healthy dose of people who were not. Even you look at Paul Robeson, the famous communist blues singer, famous in the United States, black man, who's openly declared that black people, if a war were to break out between the United States and the Soviet Union, that blacks in this country would not fight for the United States. And to go back to Sugar Ray Robinson. Sugar Ray Robinson had a reply for Paul Robeson. He said he threatened Paul Robeson that if he were to ever run into Paul Robeson in public, he was going to punch him in the mouth because Sugar Ray Robinson didn't take kindly to that kind of anti-Americanism. But this became the popular kind of thing because American blacks were behind the eight ball, and we were being oppressed and all these things, and so you had this kind of this new sense of I'm oppressed. People think that blacks have always been of this mindset, but blacks didn't, by and large, become this way until the sort of popularization after World War II of these ideas that became kind of part and parcel of this sort of new paradigm of the left wing intelligentsia. And so I think that the issue can be solved, or can only be solved, with a renovation, revival of our culture, of our ethics, of our sense of duty, what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be an American, what it means to be a standard bearer of the Western tradition. And it all goes back to the Bible, and to our commitment to God and to faith and everything else. Even if you want to go back to the pre-Judaic era, and the great Greek philosophers like Aristotle, we must get back to our traditions, and refamiliarize ourselves with the responsibility that we have as citizens. There's too much nihilism. Nobody believes in anything anymore. Everyone's sort of out for self. Everyone thinks that they could be what they want to be. I can be a man. I can be a woman one day. I can be a cat. I can be a dog. It's just so much ridiculousness that, yeah, I think that we need to scale back some of the advancements of classical liberalism, because we have pretty much gone off the rails, and I don't think this is what our forefathers had intended at all. But here we are. But yeah. Well,
I hope you hear me. Do you hear me?
yeah, I hear you now. I hear you now. But yeah, but I gotta
I know.
take off.
So I know it's a wrap. We're gonna do a part two. Kind
Yeah.
of not fight, and whatever that is, and we're gonna crack through the anti-Semitic law. We'll come back.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, Lydia. I know I tend to be long-winded because I am an over-explainer, because I really want to give people the full, just I want to put it all in there. Is I don't have enough time to say everything that I want to say, but I just want to give people enough breadcrumbs so they can do their own research and come back later and say I'm crazy or I agree or just whatever. So I know that we probably didn't cover everything we wanted to cover because I am long-winded, but I have no problem coming back, and we can do it again.
Yeah, but we'll come back. We'll do it, and it worked out here. It worked out.
Yeah, I kind of had to take over because you was having audio issues. So I was like, let me do the majority of the talking.
I don't know what's going on. So but next time we'll get cut into it a little.
Okay.
But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. Thanks for everything.
All
And
right, for sure. Yeah. Peace.
peace out, everyone.
All right, now. See you later.
Here,